Ready? Okay, everybody, let's get this party started. So thanks to everyone who made their way here today. We still do have a few registrants that might be making their way in, coming from the back of the room. I am Brigitta Miranda Freer with the Montana World Trade Center, and many of you in this room I know already, some of you I don't. So I'll just give you a quick little overview of the Montana World Trade Center and who we are and what we do. I'll frame this conversation today, and then we'll get rolling, okay? So Montana World Trade Center is a World Trade Center like over 300 in nearly 100 countries around the world. And this one happens to be housed at the University of Montana. And from our offices there, we serve businesses across the state of Montana, assisting them with their international trade endeavors. And most of the time that means we're helping them with building out or carrying out an export strategy. Sometimes we help on the import or sourcing side. We do organize trade missions, so inbound and outbound trade delegations. And we're also playing a leading role in our state's efforts to attract select foreign direct investment into our state. But the reason that we're all here today is because our last bucket where we dedicate our time and energy and resources is to training related to international business. And our TechEX series, and you all should have information in front of you on that there today, is really designed to move the needle on Montana's technology-based exports. So whether we're talking about bioscience or optics and photonics or cloud computing, we think these industries are going to be, increasingly important drivers of our economy moving forward, and they are certainly industries that are excellent candidates for export. So let's see, in 1 minute I'm going to go through the schedule, but I do want to take a second here to call out and specifically thank our sponsors, because guess what? This doesn't happen without them. And I know this is the part where people like start checking their email, but don't. I really want to just give a special thank you to Joel Henry and Warden. He's now with Warden Thane. Many of you know, here's a couple more participants. Many of you have known Joel for a number of years, and he is an entrepreneur's attorney because he was and remains an entrepreneur, and particularly in the cloud computing space. So working with Joel is always a pleasure, and I think that he brings a particular skill set that's very helpful to some of the folks that are in the room here today. So thanks, Joel. Also, I definitely want to thank Bannockburn, and Michael Burke from Bannockburn is over there. He has brought his accent all the way from Australia and his person all the way from San Francisco to be with us here today. And Bannockburn deals with foreign exchange, and so you might think to yourself, there aren't many companies in Montana that deal with foreign exchange, but there are. You're either dealing with it directly, or you're dealing with it because maybe you're missing out on some business because this is not a service that you offer. And I can tell you that most SMEs in Montana do not have dedicated departments for this. So really think of Bannockburn, and we do, think of them as an extension of your team that's dedicated specifically to this functionality to help you grow your business, okay? So I invite you to chat with him later about that. And then also, I really want to thank Jop Fellinger, and I very much hope I did not butcher your name there, Jop. Jop has come from he's joining us from the furthest distance away. He's in the Netherlands, and it is +8 hours there. So Jop, I will tell you that 8 hours from now, I will be home in my pajamas, so I really want to thank you for not doing that yet. Or, well, I mean, maybe the bottom half of you is there. I don't know. So thank you very much. I thought it was very important to layer in a European perspective on this issue as well, since we are going to be talking about EU GDPR today. So our TechEX initiative, we like to, this is kind of a layered approach to training, right? Because we think you learn best, and you've told us that you learn best when we're not only giving you subject matter expertise, but we're layering in the personal experience of one of your peers, right? So we always have a sort of a live case study, a business that's willing to come in and share their story with us about how they started, how they've grown their business at the beginning to do business internationally. And in this case, we're really, really fortunate to have Bruce Trivenzy, one of the founders of Submittable, with us today to talk about that whole experience. There he is, and I'll call these guys up in a little bit to talk about his experience there. And he is literally in the final throes of prepping for EU GDPR. So this is just a really good timing for those of you listening. Maybe not such great timing for Bruce, who probably wishes he had a couple more hours on this, but thank you for dedicating the time. Okay, so now for our framework today, we are going to go to Jop first, because it's pretty late, and we have given him the option of bailing out if you need to. But I do hope if you can, you might stay around, because I feel like there might be some questions towards the end on enforcement that it would be handy to have another opinion on. So he'll speak for about 10 minutes or so, and he has a presentation. We should be able to see his presentation, and you also have printed copies in your materials there. And then we're going to move it on to Bruce, who's going to come up and share. We'll invite him up to share his story. Joel will then come in and give us some feedback based on what he's heard from Bruce in terms of best practices and doing business internationally, and specifically in relation to EU GDPR. And we'll have some questions. I bet we'll have questions throughout. And I'm going to move this along, so forgive me if at some point, whether you're a speaker or a questioner, I have to cut you off. There will be opportunity. We have reserved a little bit of time at the end too, okay? Sound good? Okay, so then, Jop, we're going to start off with you. Go.
Okay. Jop, we are ready for you to share your screen when you are. I'm going to give you the class.
Here you go. All right.
Class. Everybody, say hi.
See. Amazing how technology works. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to speak to you about GDPR. Especially, it's tomorrow. It's in full force and effect, and as we speak, I'm still having new emails pouring in my inbox of companies that are begging me to stay with them, etc. So it's really going on, and it's really alive. I would like to share some insights on some of our expertise regarding privacy law, and especially GDPR. As I said, tomorrow it's going to be the big day, and it's a Friday, which is fortunate. So I think only on Monday our local authority will be awake and well, and will have all permissions revoked to really inspect the companies that are most in the likely to be visited by the supervising authorities, which will be most likely companies that deal a lot with personal data. Well, it's not all terrible. In fact, actually, there is one of the benefits is that it is one set of legislation for the entire EU, whilst at this moment it's all national legislation. So imagine if you were a multinational in the EU, you would have to go through all procedures in every country again, and that really is a drag. So this is really a huge step forward. However, the GDPR rules are a little bit different, and in my opinion, it will be more actively deployed. So, as we are processing now, what do we want to achieve today? A global understanding of what personal data are. We will be able to understand the principles behind GDPR. We'll be able to see why it also has an impact outside of the EU, and that's actually the prime reason why I was invited to speak to you about GDPR. And in the center of it all are personal data, and actually that's any information relating to the identifiable natural person, which is the data subject. That does not always have to be only a name. As long as the data can be traced back to a natural person, then we're talking about personal data. And personal data as such is not only subject to GDPR, you have to do something with it or not do something with it, which is processing. It could be keeping it on record, actively using it, any operation or set of operations performed with personal data. And typically that's done by the controller, which is a natural legal person who determines the purposes and the means of the processing. It could be your company requesting a customer if the personal data can be processed for the purpose of executing the agreement between you and that company. And what I've understood, there's a lot of SaaS companies in your room right now, which are very likely to be identified as a processor. And that is the natural legal person that processes personal data on behalf of the controller and is not determining the purposes and means of the processing. Now, that sounds really clear, but not in all cases it is. Naturally, SaaS, if you were to process personal data on behalf of your customer and you're not doing anything with these personal data on your own accord and with your own purpose, then you're a processor. But at this moment, an interesting development in the Netherlands is that, for instance, banks, if I were to instruct my bank to pay a certain amount to another party, then you could very well say that the bank is a processor. However, most banks, in the course of our implementation of GDPR with our office for one thing, but also our customers that we're accompanying and helping to implement, they've actually said, no, we're not a processor, we're controllers. We have our own set of extra processes with these personal data that are on our own accord and have to do with our own business. And as a bank, for instance, we're supervised and we have to have our own processes also with these personal data. So we don't consider ourselves to be a processor, we're a controller ourselves, which makes that you don't have to have a processor agreement in place. And in my opinion, that's basically the driver behind that legal point of view, because otherwise they would have to implement process agreements with each and every client of them, which would be a huge operation. So that is one of the very recent developments. Only in the last month that we've seen that these companies, really big companies, have actually taken the position, no, we're not processors, we're controllers ourselves. Well, personal data has to be processed, taking into account a due diligence towards these personal data. You have to be transparent about it and especially accountable. Not only with easy to read privacy statement, but also with clear reference to lawfulness, such as consent, performance under a contract, or necessary for the purpose of legitimate interest pursued by the controller, which could be direct mailing with your present customers. Keep in mind that if they're not customers, you would have to ask them permission to email them. Hence, the huge avalanche of emails that we're being sent by companies to request permission. You have to be clear about the purpose of the processing. So you have to really tell the data subjects why, for what purpose you're processing, and you have to be clear about data minimization. Only data necessary for the purpose and not longer than necessary.
Hey, Jop, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
It's Brigitte, by the way. I want to make sure I heard this correctly because you were talking about emailing customers. So do you have to have permission before you're sending out emails? I guess I'm just asking that specifically because it's pretty common practice here to maybe send out blanket, emails about a product or service in order to do business development. So could you just comment on that? I couldn't hear very well.
Right. Thank you, Brigitte, for the question. Yeah, it is at this under GDPR to existing customers of which you've gotten their email address. for the purpose of executing the agreement, you can also send them emails with like newsletters, what have you. You don't need a permission for that. Why? Because it's your legitimate interest of the controller to do so. However, if they're not clients yet, and you have, for instance, gotten their data through some other source, you would have to advise them about the fact that you have them, you have to inform them, and then ask them for permission to actually send them the email. So within the email, you have to send them that. And all has to be done with opt-in, no opt-out. That's not allowed. It wasn't allowed before, but now it's definitely not allowed. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
All right. What is very important is that the process data have to be correct, or you have to correct them. So you have to be in constant contact with the data subject to make sure that the data are still correct. And you also have to take very appropriate technical and organizational measures against unauthorized or unlawful processing, use, or data breach, really. That's what it is. And at the moment, that is a very hot issue as well here in the EU. It has been in there for a while, but now everybody has to revise their data breach protocol again and be really accountable about how they handle that. Really, a lot of data breaches have been reported to the authorities, and basically not reporting something that had to be reported is going to be fined the most. So it's really important to be aware and have a good data breach policy in place. Now, what about the new rights of data subjects? Erasure is like the right to be forgotten. And please keep in mind, it's not only within your own organization. If you have distributed, even lawfully, the data to other controllers, you would have to advise them as well to erase those data. You have the right to rectify, a right of access. You have to be able to tell the data subject what the personal data are that you're processing, and you have to do all of that within 4 weeks. If you cannot do it within 4 weeks, you really have something to explain to the authorities. We already got to the right to restriction of processing, but the data subject can actually demand that you do not use more data than absolutely necessary for the purpose of processing. And the right to data portability, which makes it easier to transport all your personal data to another controller, like an insurance company. Insurance companies, all your personal data should be transferred to the new insurance company. And there's also the right to object to direct marketing and automated decision making. Now, the first one has to be within the direct marketing message, within your email or what have you. Automated decision making. It also has to do with profiling. So where big data is involved, you have to be aware that a data subject can also object to the fact that you are actually profiling a person and putting him into a certain frame, something that is being done by the Googles, etc., that have specific image already due to your browsing habits.
Jop, we have about 3 more minutes for you to roll through these slides if you can, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much for that update. I'll try to go to another point that's very important for you in the US. I mean, this is not US legislation, but it does have an impact outside the EU.
Hey, Jop, could you make sure that you're speaking very closely to your microphone? It may be a technology problem on our end, but we want to make sure to hear this part.
Okay. Well, what is very important that if you are a processor outside of the EU, you still could have to do with GDPR when you're processing personal data of data subjects in the EU. So that could even be an American citizen who is here for like a 8 months. If they are here and you're processing their personal data, then basically GDPR applies. And this is something to really take into consideration, especially if you are providing services to EU businesses. Now, you could be approached by an EU company with a question, are you compliant? And within the US, this is very important, there is the Privacy Shield. And you could apply for Privacy Shield, which will enable you to tell an EU company, yes, I'm with Privacy Shield, I'm compliant. I've put the URL on the sheet, so you can actually look at it and see whether you can apply for it. If that is not in place, then the EU has made model clauses, and a clause actually sounds like only a clause, but actually it's an agreement. And the agreement can be found on the URL that is on the screen. And basically, it's an agreement with the data control EU, which will make it sure between the parties that you will adhere to the GDPR requirements of processing personal data. So those things you could be confronted with when you're doing business with EU companies. Well, I have to, of course, tell you that this is in no way a replacement of advice. And please take it. It's impossible to talk to about GDPR in just 10 minutes in full length, depth, etc. But I'm really looking forward to taking on some of your questions that undoubtedly you will have.
Joel, thank you so much. Appreciate that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to ask Bruce Trivensey to come on up. And he's got his bio on the sheet there, but I'm assuming most of you know who Bruce is here. With Submittable, do you want to join me in a comfortable seat there, and I'll move over? He's going to tell us the story of Submittable and how you started selling internationally and where you are now.
Submittable, for anybody who doesn't know the company in Missoula, we started here in 2010 or so. 3 of us put it together. We were artists, and we started doing a tool for organizations to take content from creative people, curate it, and then make decisions about it. So we've been around a while. When I started putting this together, the like a headline flashed across my screen that the U.S. cell carriers are selling your data. That's even apropos. It's exactly what GDPR is going to try to stop. And then there was also something that said